Alright guys, take a deep breath. Mod 15 brings some huge changes to the DC class, and it's important that we understand what's changing early on. This allows plenty of room for build and strategy adjustments, which are definitely going to happen after this. Please take note that this is just the initial state of the patch, and this stuff may change or evolve or just go away entirely before the release date on November 6th. First things first, they took another stab at getting rid of the 2 DC meta, and from what I've seen so far, I think they might have actually succeeded this time. The Divine Oracle Paragon was more or less turned into a DPS spec, and most of its party compatibility was removed, but more on that later. Let's talk about the more general changes first. So first of all, we have the Divinity gain changes. They made an attempt to smooth out Divinity gain and make the process of earning and depleting Divinity more fluid. They also adjusted the Divinity at-wills that no one uses and made them more effective, but I still don't think anyone will use them. The damage and healing that they do was increased significantly, but they drain Divinity faster. And as you can see, I mean, it actually does do something now, but it's not really anything compared to the regular powers that we have, which is why I don't think anyone will use it. Most of the Divinity Generation feats and class feature received buffs, but the base Divine Generation was decreased by 12%. However, if you have everything that increases the rate, you'll actually see a net gain. From my testing, it's actually easier to fill up the meter even without using many bonuses. The Divine Fortune class feature had its base divinity increased to 20%, which is 15% higher than before. The rank up bonuses were not changed, so this means that using the class feature at rank 4 gives you a 35% divinity generation bonus. Now, the Bountiful Fortune class, heroic feat had its divinity bonus increased too. It now grants a 20% Divinity Generation bonus when you have 5 points in it, which is 5% higher than before. And of course, the other tiers were increased too. And the Gift of the Gods Paragon feat was not changed, so it's still a 25% bonus if you have all 5 points in there. And then, of course, you got Avatar of the Divine, which was completely reworked, and it now gives a 25% Divinity Generation bonus when it's active. So, combining all this stuff together, or even some of the stuff, it's actually a lot easier to earn Divinity. And when I first read it, I was like, oh, it's going to be harder to get Divinity, which means our effectiveness is going to be changed. Nope, it's actually easier to fill up your meter, and I like it. Overall, even though the base Divinity Generation was nerfed, it actually feels like a buff because of the changes. And I wonder how many times I said Divinity in there. Probably like 100. So, powers and feats. This is where the nerf hammer was dropped, and it was dropped hard. I'll just get the worst ones over with first. Terrifying Insight no longer gives a party damage buff. Yep, you heard that right. Instead, it gives a 25% personal damage buff and applies a 10% damage resistance debuff to the enemies for 5 seconds. So that is the Divine Oracle's main selling point, and that was more or less removed because debuffs can be applied by other classes, and it's basically just designed to be used for solo DPS play. And I think it'll be good for solo DPS, sure, but that still takes away a ton just from that alone from DO. Next up, Forgemaster's Flame no longer gives a party damage buff either. Instead, it increases the damage resistance of your allies by 5% per stack, so 15% if fully empowered. The way the power damages enemies was also reworked. It deals a small amount of damage initially and then applies the damage over time for 3 seconds. Using it in Divine Mode slows the enemy by 20% for 6 seconds, and this stacks up to 3 times. Although its party benefit is more or less gone, I noticed that it actually deals a lot more damage than before and might be something to look into for the new DO DPS builds. So if you see here, let's fully empower this, and then watch how much damage it actually does. There's its initial attack, and then just damage over time. I mean, it's a lot more than you're used to seeing, so I do think that it may be used in some instances for DPSing stuff. Now we got Hastening Light. Another nerf. Its base recharge time was increased to 1.5, but each rank up was reduced to half a second. So this means that 4 points will cool down everyone's powers by 3 seconds instead of 4 every time you cast a daily. Seems like a small nerf, but Hastening Light is very important and very useful, so I'm certain that it's going to be noticed, especially because the 2 DC meta was hit, so you're probably only going to have 1 in your party, so it's even more noticeable. And now we've got this not very useful feat called Living Fire. It was increased from 30% to 35% needed to proc. And basically when your health is below 35%, you deal 25% extra damage if it's full. And this effect remains for 5 seconds after you're above 35%. That was also added, that's new. And, I mean, it's still not very good. I don't think it's definitely not gonna be a main feat, but due to the changes to Piercing Light, it might be worth putting a couple points in, I guess. Just for that odd opportunity where you are almost dead and then you can be like, hi-ya, and just destroy everything and emerge unharmed. Well, almost unharmed. It's not very realistic, but whatever. Moving on. Piercing Light had its armor penetration bonus doubled. Now this is a huge buff for damage-related builds. It now gives a flat 20% resistance ignored instead of 10%. This frees up some points that you can put elsewhere because it's very easy to have excessive amounts of armor penetration. As you can see, I've got like 15k, and with that, it's 140%. Alright. So, I mean, I could get rid of that, or I could swap out some armor penetration on me for more crit so that I can reach 100% instead of 85. So, I mean, it's something to experiment with. That is actually a good change. And now, most importantly, or at least semi-importantly, we have Avatar of the Divine. This capstone feat was reworked, sort of. I mean, it's sort of similar, but sort of different too, and I actually really like how this was changed. The first power you use after entering combat grants you Avatar for 20 seconds, and you also gain this effect every 45 seconds in combat. Okay, not too much of a change there. Avatar increases your damage dealt by 50%, which is an increase, Divinity generation by 25%, and cooldown speed by 25%. Leaving combat cancels it and resets its cooldown same as before. Casting encounters reduces the cooldown time of Avatar by 1.5 seconds for each stack of Empowered consumed. This is why I like it, because you can have it a lot more often now as long as you keep gaining and spending Divinity, which is the process that they smoothed out that I explained above, or earlier. Above? Whatever. It's basically, Righteous is going to be your DPS tree. Just the same as it was, but slightly better. Now, for Dio, Foresight had its damage resistance changed. It was increased by 2%, so it's 4% total bonus damage resistance. So, Prophecy of Doom, also nerfed. Slightly. It's not like it was really used in empowered mode anyways. Its damage resistance debuff was reduced by 50%, so it's now 2.5% instead of 5 per stack. Not many people used it, so I don't think that'll have much of an impact. The rest of it is basically the same. Also, its animation time was reduced very slightly. It was reduced by 0.4 seconds. So, I mean, it's not super noticeable. Maybe slightly. When I first cast it, I was like, yeah, I don't notice it being any shorter, but 0.4 seconds is kind of hard to visualize. And then lastly, Brand of the Sun, which I for some reason don't have equipped anymore. It no longer generates Divinity while you're in Divine mode. And this fixes an issue where you sometimes wouldn't leave Divinity mode after you cast all 3 Divine encounters. I have noticed this before, and it was a nuisance when it did happen, so I'm kind of glad this was fixed. Some people read it wrong, that it wasn't passively generating Divinity, and as you can see, it still is. It does passively generate Divinity, still just not when you're in Divine mode. So if I switch to Divine mode, it will stop. So, and if I unswitch, and use it again, it will keep generating. So it's not going to be as noticeable as you think it is. So with all of those changes, the big question is, what does this mean for DO? As you might have guessed, DOs won't really have much of a place in a meta party group anymore. Pretty much their only purpose now would be to cast Hallowed Ground and apply damage resistance debuffs to the enemies. The AC Cleric will switch to Break the Spirit because Forge Masters doesn't have a damage bonus anymore, and the DO won't be able to use that either. Other classes can already provide enough debuffs, so I don't think that they're going to be desired as much at all. And I do expect to see some experimental groups with a DO as the DPS. So it should be interesting to see how that plays out. I'm probably going to make a DPS build to use whenever I'm not needed as an AC, and that will probably replace my DO buff build that's on my guide right now. Because, I mean, it won't exist anymore, so what's the point? Okay. I am concerned, though, for new clerics, because DO was a great starting point, and you could be very effective in your group even with low item level or low experience. Now that they don't really have that opportunity, people are only going to want AC clerics for their runs, and of course they're going to want good ones. There's nothing new there, but I'm afraid newer or lower item level DCs are going to have a much harder time finding a place in the newer content runs. I could be wrong, and this is just my initial impression of these changes, but I guess we'll see as time goes on. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and I'll do my best to answer. Keep an eye on my Twitch, as I'll be streaming Mod 15 content as it's updated, actually doing a stream in a few hours today of the initial patch, so you should come hang out for that. Thank you guys for watching. Also a belated thank you for 300 subscribers. It's not many, but I jumped from 250 to 300 in a week, so I felt it deserved some acknowledgement. Let me know what you think of all these changes and any of the other changes that were released. I'll post a link to the preview forums in the description where you can read up on all the class changes and the base patch changes too, though the detailed patch notes are not yet available, but the main content ones are. Have fun testing, and I'll see you guys later.